Hey, what's up? It's your boy Jack Bravo, and today I'm going to do something different. I told you guys I will be more focused on art stuff. What I want to teach you guys is how to draw from references and making up stuff as you go from your imagination. This is not something you should do. If you're a beginning artist, this is not something you should do when you work on professional things, unless you're doing some type of character art where you're supposed to just make up characters. This is my process of how I warm up, how I keep my imagination going in case I'm trying to design something new. I don't just randomly draw and create from my imagination when I have a set character that's supposed to be in a set scene. When I'm doing that, I draw from a character sheet, one that I've designed. But when you're warming up and you're trying to get the juices flowing in your art process, you can do this. And that's something I want to show. So I'll go back to one of my pieces, and here's another caveat here. I do not think this piece is good. I just think that it'll show the process of how I think, and it may be more like you think for all those left brain people out there. I'm left-handed, by the way. Maybe you don't think the same way everybody does, and you don't want to approach an art piece the same way everybody does. This is how I approach how I come up with character designs, and how I practice at the same time. So just look here. So the first thing that I do is if I'm trying to practice warm up, is I do some figure drawing and I do some drawing of poses. One of the best places you can do that is Pinterest. Pinterest has a lot of boards. So you click on something and you just scroll down and you'll see almost infinite amount of things like the first thing you clicked on. So if you click on a pose like we have here, you'll see, if you scroll down, you'll see several other poses you can pick from. If you're just trying to practice draw, it's a great tool to use. Okay, so we pick the pose we want, and we'll be using the guy that's in the corner holding that scythe hook type thing, this weapon, and we're just going to be sketching, okay? So when we sketch, all we're doing is trying to get the general gesture of the character that we're going to be adding more detail to. When we do that, we're trying to make sure a couple of things: that the proportions are correct, that the head shape and general head direction is correct, that we're not drawing anything that looks like the bones are broken, making sure everything's correct. When we do that, we're focusing on simple shapes. We're not trying to draw anything super detailed here. We just focusing on simple shapes. These simple shapes make up more complex shapes. What are simple shapes? Circles, squares, cylinders, things of that nature. It's a lot of other videos by artists that are much better than I am that lay out how do you start complex drawings with simple shapes. Everything you know can be made out of a simple shape, a combination of simple shapes, pretty much everything. So what we're doing here is we're also paying attention when we go to the next level, drawing over. You can add another layer. I use Paint Tool Side, which pretty much everything, whether you use Paint Tool Side, Photoshop, or Clip Studio Paint, I use all of those. They all have the function to add another layer. When you're drawing and you want to add more details, don't just draw details onto the same layer. Add another layer so it doesn't affect the layer underneath, and then you use the layer underneath as a reference to add more detail. As you can see here, I'm just adding in more detail. When I get the structure the way I want, when I focus on the anatomy the way that I want it to be, I'm looking at where do muscles come in at? How do they sit on the character? Is this a strong, alpha type character? Is this a bony type character? Is this a male, a female? The muscles change depending on what your character are. Pay attention to how muscles are. See there, now what I'm doing is I lower the opacity so that I could focus on the next layer and add more details. When I'm adding more details, now I'm looking into What type of weapon is he holding? I'm just making these things up as I go. And what I'm doing is using my imagination to say, what type of character do we have here? Is this a character that's going to be using an axe, a spear, a scythe? What does he have? And then depending on what you start with, will dictate what else is going on with that character. If he's an axe character, generally people that use an axe, something heavy on the end, are typically stronger type characters. A spear is not as heavy as an axe. A spear head is not as heavy as an axe head is. So if you're going to use a giant axe, you're probably going to be a more muscular character if that's your normal weapon. These are things that I'm thinking about while I'm designing a character. Is that character evil? Is he a character that's like more imperial? Is he just a wasteland character? These are things I'm thinking about when I'm designing or just making things up as I go. I'm not just drawing lines. I'm thinking, this is why you see me erasing so much. I'm like, okay, this might fit, but that might not. Is this character somebody who has sharp features or soft features? All things to consider. As you can see, one of the things that I want people to know, especially if you're a beginner person looking at a mediocre person like me, mediocre artist, like I'll say this again, I don't consider myself to be the best at all. A beginner person will look and not notice all the mistakes being made. Good artists make millions of mistakes per art piece that they work on. They either get good at hiding them or good at correcting them. That is a fact. Everything you see me draw, all the lines, all the things where you're like, okay, why is he erasing that? Just because it's a mistake. It's because I drew it and it was not up to the standard I want, or it didn't look how I intended or how I envisioned it. Those are normal art things. As you can see, sometimes when I'm erasing, I'm not necessarily erasing because it's a mistake. I'm erasing because I see more detail I could have added in that I just came up with at the time. And that's normal too. So here's another thing. When you're making up a character as you go, you want to, once you get a certain idea down, you want to start noticing consistencies. What does that mean? If that character's a bad guy, and he has a lot of horns on him, or he has sharp things like he has just sharp figures protruding from his shoulders, or anything like that, then that should be consistent across his whole outfit. That doesn't mean every little inch of him has to have pointy things sticking out, but it does mean if he has sharp shoulder pads, then why should his knee pads be rounded? At some point, things will start to look inconsistent if you don't think about that. If he has a design on his helmet, then maybe the design on his breastplate should be somewhat consistent with the design on his helmet. You get what I'm saying? You can't have like a character who has soft features. You can. It's a rule. You can break every rule in the art book. You can break every single rule, but make sure it looks good. Here's the overall rule. If it's visually appealing and it works, you can do whatever you want. If it's not visually appealing and people can look at it and be like, I don't know, I don't get that, then you failed somewhere. You want the purpose of art is to be generally visually appealing. Does that mean every character has to be a supermodel? No, but it means that when you draw an evil character, say you're drawing an evil goblin, that character should look like whatever you intended it to be. If somebody said you're drawing the most gruesome evil goblin and somebody comes along and says, that's so cute, you failed. You failed because it didn't do what you intended it to do. If it's supposed to be a scary evil goblin that bites people's heads off, then you got to portray that in your art. If it's a soldier that's supposed to be strong and stoic, then its jawline probably doesn't want to be rounded, right? Because that doesn't give off the feeling of a strong and stoic character. So that's some rules. Every artist has to be a master of perception. You should know how your art comes off to a certain degree. And the better you get at art, the more you will notice, man, when I look at my old stuff, I'm like, that didn't come off the way I wanted it to, and I can do this better now. You should always be better in yourself. Now, here's a couple of things that I'm not focused on yet. I'm not focused on line depth. Not yet. If I was, I would start a new layer after the layer I'm currently working on. I'm not focused on so much as how to get these deep shadows that you see in a lot of comic book art. I'm not doing that because I'm just practicing. This is what I'll do to warm up before I start the art that I'm really going to be focused on. I'm just getting my fingers and my brain, my muscle memory, all that stuff in line so that I can work on what I really want to work on. So, as you can see, I'm going in and I'm trying to make sure the consistency is there. With this character, one of the things that you'll see is that one of the themes of his outfit is the triangular shapes, almost like a jester's hat or something like that. The triangular shapes will be on his helmet. They're on that little horn thing on the top. There's going to be on his belt. I'm already thinking about where I'm going to put these things. They're going to be on his little skirt thing, whatever you call that. What is that, kilt? Or whatever. I don't know what it is, but I just know I like the way it looks. I'm thinking about, okay, if I have a certain design here, where else am I going to put it? And then one of the main things that I'm focused on when I'm drawing is making sure no matter what part of the character you look at, it's not boring. When you shouldn't have a character that's super detailed and then his weapon is boring. Unless that's part of your story, maybe, but then you gotta wonder, why is that? If you have a character that's super detailed in one area, don't get lazy in the other areas. If you're designing characters from your imagination, you got one character that got a really fancy belt and then he's just got a t-shirt on. That kind of, that will be boring to look at. People look at stuff that excites them. The more detail in something that you can put in there that's consistent, don't just be throwing in lines, but the more detail you can put in something that's consistent, the more somebody will look at it and be like, oh, that's cool. It's so much to look at here. Your brain doesn't get bored when you look at it. That's why I'm adding here these little things, this thing around his arm. Is it now here's the thing. Is it practical? Probably not. Would you want to fight with a big metal arm thing that's just there for just to look cool? Probably not. So if I was making a character that had to be like in a video game, this would be like an initial design, but not the final design. I'm just drawing. I'm just making stuff up as I go. What you also can do is a lot of people will scribble out some of these things and they'll just design an outfit and they'll come back and make sure that the anatomy is right. Here's one thing about anatomy, and I was trying to teach this to another young man this week, is that anatomy, I am not a master at anatomy at all, but anatomy is something that every good artist will never stop studying. You have to study it. If you want to be an artist, you cannot skip anatomy. You cannot skip stuff like figure drawing, but anatomy is even more important, because anatomy, in my opinion, teaches you all the other stuff. If your anatomy good, even if you're drawing anamorphic characters, if you're drawing characters like bunny rabbit faces, human anatomy will teach you and make you better at drawing everything that you draw, because human anatomy is what the human eye sees most of the time, especially faces. When we look at somebody, we focus on their face. So if something's wrong, when somebody's drawing a face, say they drawing a character, he look like that. People will notice off the bat. One of his eyes are crooked. They will notice because we look at faces 90% of the time. Some people be looking at other stuff, but most people look at faces. And so it's easy to notice when somebody messes up on things like that. But anatomy helps you with everything you do as an artist. You cannot skip it. I'm constantly learning. Hands and feet. As you can see, I am not a master at drawing hands and feet. But hands specifically, I like drawing hands, but I gotta get better at drawing feet and stuff like tennis shoes and stuff like that. I gotta practice. Practice. The only way to get better at art, before you can ask other people questions about how to get better, practice it 1,000 times, 1,000 times. Just draw every day. Draw. If you want to get better, if you can't do that, then art is not the way for you. Because art is about being obsessive. It's about looking at something and being like, I want to become a master at that. I don't want to just draw hands and have them look like sausages stuck to a book. I want to be a master where people can't even tell the difference between a photo and my drawing. If you have that desire to get that good, you'll be a great artist. But as we go back to the picture here, what I'm doing is I'm taking away the layers, okay? So when you draw something detailed, oftentimes your brain can trick you that it looks better than it does if you keep the bottom layers on. When you take those bottom layers off, the ones you were using for guides, you can see the picture of how the viewer how you intend the viewer to see it. If you just keep those on the whole time, sometimes you'll be confused and you'll think it looks better than it does. This is why a lot of times people will put their sketches up, but they will never put their finished picture up, because sketches oftentimes look better than the finished picture. Because when you finish a picture, it's easy to see all the inconsistencies and mistakes. But when something is a sketch, the human brain will say, okay, it's just a sketch, but I can fill in the gaps here. It looks better, because you will say, okay, in your brain, you're like, it's not finished, but I see the potential. When something's finished, absolutely finished, there's no more potential. It's just there. And that's part of the problem. A lot of sketches are cool. Sometimes I like people's black and whites, and their sketch is better than their final product when it's fully colored, because sometimes I think it can take away from it. Now we're done here, right? Here's the final picture. Look at this hot piece of garbage here. I don't think it's a good drawing, but I think it teaches things. Okay, and if you learned anything from that, give us a like, a subscribe, and maybe you could share the video. I'm going to be doing a lot more of this. Check out my comic book, Wags the Warrior of Truth. If you like that, I will be putting up links where you can buy it. You can buy the merch here. Thank you guys for watching the video.